on the floor. And with us, brand new senator from the state of Pennsylvania. He is the junior senator. Pat Toomey joins us this morning on New York's Morning News. This is the first time we've been able to say that on this show. Good morning, Senator. How are you?
Good morning, gentlemen, and thanks for having me. How are you?
We're doing great. We talked to you an awful lot of time where you weren't senator, now Senator Toomey. How's that sound?
It sounds just fine. Sounds like I got a lot of work to do.
Let's get to some of that work. Yesterday, of course, the House repealed the Obamacare, and yet your guy in the Senate, Harry Reid, says he's not even going to let it out there. Is there a sense from your colleagues, from anything you can gather, that maybe there's some pressure there to bring that to the floor, at least for a discussion and maybe even a vote?
I think there is. There's a big majority in the House. In fact, it was bipartisan. There were 3 Democrats that joined all the Republicans to vote to repeal this bill. A majority of the American people want this bill repealed. And we have a whole range of alternatives that will reform health care, that would improve access, improve affordability without the enormous disruptions and costs and the disaster that this bill is. So Harry Reid should feel under pressure to put this repeal on the floor. And even if he doesn't, we Republicans will try to find a way to get it on the floor for a vote.
For people out there who think that you Republicans want to push Granny down the steps and take health care away from people, knowing that that's a straw dog argument, what are the specific things that you would do in the Senate right now as Republicans to change the health care bill? Are there any parts you would keep? Are there some that you would change? And are there some new factors that you would put in there?
Sure. Well, the entire direction that I want to go is to make health care more affordable and more accessible and under the control of individual patients rather than in the hands of government. So there's a number of reforms that we can implement. One is medical malpractice liability reform. Tort reform would help to lower the cost of health care. Lower cost means it's more available for everybody. I would like to force insurance companies to compete across state lines, because right now we have a system where we give insurance companies virtual monopolies, and then we wonder why the cost is high and we're not satisfied with their service. Well, if they had to compete, then there would be no choice, but as in other industries, they'd have to offer better quality service at lower costs. I'd like to give patients more flexibility in the kind of policies they have. The exact opposite of what they did in this bill. In this bill, they set up all these mandates, forcing you to pay for certain services that they in Washington decide that you, Gary Sutton, must have. Whether you want it or not, whether it's worth it to you or not, that doesn't matter. They don't want it to be your choice. They're going to dictate to you. Well, you've got to pay more to get those additional services. My attitude is, if you want those services, then by all means go and buy a policy that has them, but don't force everybody to pay more for health insurance by mandating coverages that not everybody wants.
Senator Toomey, and believe me, it's nice to be able to call you Senator Toomey. I wanted to ask you a little bit more of a specific question about buying health insurance across state lines. We've heard quite a bit of that over the last 2 years of discussion on this, and I wondered if you could kind of give us an indication of how that might look. For example, would that be a situation where the Gecko, for example, could be selling health insurance, or would there be a specific exchange that would ostensibly be advertised on its own, that people would pick up the phone and call that exchange number to get information? How do you see that playing out?
Well, it could play out in many different ways, but my preference would be to simply open up the market and say if an insurance company is regulated by any of the 50 states, then it is permissible for that insurance company to sell its regulated insurance in any of the 50 states. So in other words, if you would like to pay for a very high cost, very heavily regulated, loaded down with lots of mandates plan that's regulated under New York State, you'd be free to do that. But if you'd like to buy a much less expensive plan that has fewer mandates but nevertheless suits your interests well, and maybe it's regulated by Kentucky or Indiana, well, you'd be free to buy that as well. That would be my vision. These policies would all be regulated, but they'd be regulated by their various states, and consumers would decide which set of regulations, which set of mandates, and importantly, which cost they want to incur.
And so theoretically, there could be perhaps hundreds of health insurance companies that any given consumer could access at any time.
Absolutely right.
Senator, when you look at that, though, what is the biggest roadblock to setting it up? It sounds so easy. It's like everything else that we shop for. And, we look at auto insurance, for example. We shop across state lines. Why not
Absolutely.
health insurance? What's the problem?
The problem is that there are some in Washington who really want to move in the opposite direction. The last thing they want is for consumers to have lots of choices and control of their own health insurance because they think that the government should run the entire thing. And this bill is a step. It's a huge step, and it's the first big step in the direction of universal government-run health care. And, that's a fact. I mean, some on the other side admit it and some don't, but that's the idea. And they know that if we move in the direction that I want to go, like medical savings accounts, like personal ownership, competition among insurance companies, that's the opposite direction. That gives individual patients ownership, gives them control, dramatically diminishes the danger of a problem with pre-existing conditions. It does all of these things, but it does it in the context of personal ownership and a marketplace of competition. That's the last thing they want.
I was reading a piece by Karl Rove this morning in the Wall Street Journal, and he made 3 points, and I just wanted you to react to these if you could. He said the longer this issue is around, health care, he said the worse it's likely to be for Democrats. This year's Obamacare-mandated Medicare cuts are geometrically larger than last year's. Dissatisfaction among health care providers will continue rising as a new health care law adversely affects their profession. The concerns of business leaders will become more pronounced as the laws limit their choices while increasing their costs. And finally, consumer discontent will grow as promised declines in health care insurance premiums and health care costs don't materialize. Your thoughts on that? Does that pretty much capsulize the argument right there?
Well, I think it's true. It's a bill that's so badly flawed. It will do all of those things. It will cause people to lose their coverage. It is already causing insurance premiums to rise. It is diminishing the flexibility and the discretion that doctors can exercise when they are taking care of patients.
Right.
And so the more people experience this, the more they're going to become upset with this bill. So to that extent, I suppose it will have that political effect that Karl Rove talks about.
Senator, let me ask you a little bit more about the politics of this. Let's assume that the politics begin to play out the way most pundits are expecting it to, and the Senate doesn't really have a role, or for whatever reason, Senator Reid is able to block this in the Senate, and so there's nothing happening there. Then the Republicans in the House begin to work on defunding this bill measure by measure. Does the Senate have a role to play moving forward if that is the scenario that we're faced with in the next week or so?
Absolutely, it does. Absolutely, because the bills that fund the government, including those which would fund or not fund this Obamacare bill, those have to go through the Senate as well. And there are a lot of Democrats in the Senate who have real reservations about this bill. They might have voted for it, but they've got their doubts. They know that it's badly flawed. Many of them are facing election in 2012, and they've got a state full of constituents that don't like this bill. So I think it's very, very possible that we will at least be able to slow down the implementation of this bill if we can't stop all of it, since after all, the president, he has a lot of say in this matter too. But yes, the answer to your question is the Senate will definitely have a role in this.
It's interesting right now. It looks like you only had 3 Democrats cross over yesterday in the House vote. You've got some that are kind of hiding right now in the Senate, but we have 24 senatorial seats up that are going to be fought for in the next election. It seems like they're waiting for the next step now, which would be, for example, if the Republicans in the House decide not to fund some of these bills, and obviously appropriations bills always start in the House. So is that what we're seeing right here? Safe votes right now, but we're going to see the real votes coming later on. We start to see the meat on the table?
Well, the more immediate impact is likely to come from the votes on the funding, right? Because those are very tangible. They go into effect immediately. Those are very real. But I wouldn't dismiss the importance of an up or down vote on the whole repeal. Consider a few things. First of all, there's 47 Republicans in the House. I think every one of them will vote to repeal the bill. Mm-hmm. There are of the 33 senators up for re-election in 2012, 23 are Democrats, and many of them have very tough races on their hands. They would be hard-pressed to vote to repeal a bill they just voted for, but 1 or 2 of them might. And imagine if they did. We would now be at a point where let's say 2 Democrats voted with all the Republicans. We'd have 49 votes in the Senate to repeal this bill. Now, the real significance then comes 2 years from now. if we have a new president in the White House and we've made some gains, we have a huge majority in the House and a near majority in the Senate that had already voted to repeal it. At that point, when a repeal vote comes up, to get it over the top becomes really quite feasible. So the votes this Congress, even if they don't result in a repeal this Congress, they can set the stage for future repeal. Senator,
we would be remiss this morning if we didn't ask you, and kind of switching up just for a moment, about your recent fact-finding trip to Afghanistan. I know you're just back from that. You had a chance to see how the war is going there, how that country is doing. What did you take away from that?
Well, so much. It's hard to know where to start. Let me just tell you, one of the really extraordinary impressions was made by just the incredible professionalism, the competence, the dedication of our armed services. The folks we met from General Petraeus and General Rodriguez, who's executing the war plan in Afghanistan, to privates and sergeants that we met with along the way. I can't tell you how impressed I was and how proud I am of the military service that the United States has on the field in Afghanistan. The second fact is that, and this is underreported, there's been some reporting, but not nearly enough, the last 6 months or so, there's actually been some tremendous progress on the ground. Tremendous progress by our men and women in clearing the Taliban away from whole sections of Afghanistan. I toured a small province in the south, in Helmand province, a small district within Helmand province. A year ago, the Taliban ruled. They completely controlled. There was no freedom of transportation. They terrorized the villagers. They own that real estate. Today, there are no Taliban, and there's an increasing likelihood that they won't be able to come back. That's the big question. I think we are clearly making very significant progress in clearing away the Taliban, in holding the real estate that we are clearing. The question is, how quickly and how able will the Afghan army and the Afghan police force and really the Afghan government, how able will they be to take over those areas from us and to make those gains permanent? At this point, they're not yet permanent. The Afghan government's not where it needs to be. But I will say, I do see progress in that direction.
Senator, just a couple of minutes left here in our segment with you, and I didn't want this opportunity to go by without giving you the ability to comment a little bit on the economy overall and where you saw things headed now with a Republican House and a greater number of Republicans in the Senate. Where are we going? Where do we stand right now? What are your thoughts on the economy?
Well, the economy is still far weaker than it needs to be. The performance has been lagged well behind what a recovery should look like after a severe recession. So we've got an awful lot of work to do. There's some helpful signs. The fact that the way the elections played out last fall means that many of the really dangerous anti-growth, anti-job provisions that the Obama administration had been proposing, things like cap and trade and card check, those things are not going to happen legislatively. And that's very good. They will not pass a Republican-controlled House. They can't pass a Senate now. The problem is, and the danger is, that there are many in the administration that intend to try to impose those things through the regulatory agencies, the EPA, and the FDA and the FCC, and these agencies are expanding regulations and government control of the economy at a pace that I've never seen before. So yesterday, the president had, or actually 2 days ago, the president had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal where he talked about the need to review regulation that was excessive, that was curtailing business, that was preventing job growth. And I was glad to see the president acknowledge that too much government regulation is, in fact, bad for the economy. That's an important concession that he had never made that I'm aware of in the past. Now we've got to see them actually carry through. And this is a big role for the Senate, to go through and to do the sometimes tedious but important work of oversight and reining in agencies and bureaucracies that are preventing us from having the economic growth we need. I think that could be a significant part of allowing this economy to have the recovery that we need.
And, of course, one of the things he did not mention, though, in that op-ed was health care, where you have a number of regulations in there that, as he might have said, might seem to some in the country as just plain stupid, quote unquote.
And there's no question they are costing us jobs right now. I mean, when you add dramatically to the cost of hiring a new worker, guess what? You get fewer new workers hired. And this health care bill adds increases the cost of bringing on a new worker. So that's just one clear and obvious and straightforward example of the kind of harm that some of these regulations do. You're right. The president's not pointing to the health care bill when he writes an op-ed like this. But nevertheless, I think it's important that he's conceding the point. And it allows us to then have a debate over individual regulations, and it makes it harder for those who are defending this big expansion of government to defend it when we can point to the specific costs and the jobs lost, and then we refer back to the president's op-ed and say, listen, guys, it's our president has said that under these conditions, these excessive regulations need to be rolled back. I'm hoping we're able to make progress there.
Senator Toomey, about 30 seconds left. Are you personally working on any new initiatives right now?
I am. You may have seen the op-ed that I had in yesterday's Wall Street Journal. In the debate about whether or not to raise the debt ceiling, and if so, by how much, there's been a little bit of a campaign of misinformation. Some have suggested that we just have to just go along, vote to raise the debt ceiling, keep on borrowing money, because if we don't, the American government will default on its debt, right? You've heard that basic argument. Well, I wrote a piece in the Journal pointing out that that's simply factually wrong. If we don't raise the debt ceiling, tax revenue alone will provide almost 70% of everything government is scheduled to spend next year. Service of our debt is only 6% of all the spending that's in the budget. So there's no reason at all that we would default on our debt. And so I'm going to introduce legislation that will simply say, in the event that we don't raise the debt ceiling, the first priority will be to make sure that we don't default. We don't put America in a position of having defaulted and just trash our credit rating. That would be very irresponsible. So let's take that financial meltdown scenario off the table, and then let's argue about what kind of spending cuts and budget process reforms we need to insist on if we're going to raise the debt ceiling. Because I think just raising the debt ceiling without changing our spending ways would be the most irresponsible thing we could do.
Philosophically, some would say we've already defaulted in this country, and we need to stop doing it. Senator, we appreciate you joining us this morning. We look forward to more talks with you. But thank you so much for joining us today, and continue good luck.
Thanks very much for having me, guys.
Thank you.